Hi, I'm Loic and welcome to Music RedOne's YouTube channel. Today we're going to take a dive into microphones. I will guide you through them, help you choose what's the best one for your application. We'll look at their specs, their pros and cons, and different types of microphone. So get ready, let's dive into it. So before we get into actual microphone types, there's a couple concepts I want to introduce you to. The first one is the difference between capsules. There are mainly two common kind of capsules that you'll find. The first one is the dynamic capsule. It's the simplest. It's the one that you've seen the most. It has a decent sound quality. They are made very sturdy, so they can take a beating easily. After that, you will have the condenser capsule that is found in a lot of different kinds of microphone, but the one you'll see the most is probably a studio vocal microphone like this. They're made in a bit more sophisticated way, so they tend to be more fragile. You gotta be more careful with them, but the advantage of them is that they have a better sound quality than dynamic capsules usually, so a lot of people will like them for studio recording and such. Secondly, I want to get into different kinds of polar patterns. So what a polar pattern is the way that a microphone will capture its sound. There are three common ones that I'll get into today. There are some more, but I don't want to get too complicated. I will explain to you what the most common ones are. So the first one I want to talk about is the cardioid polar pattern. So what cardioid means is that the microphone will mostly capture the sound right in front of it, and it will be least sensitive on the back and the sides of the microphone. So next we got supercardioid, which is pretty much the same concept as cardioid, but being even more narrow. So it will be even less sensitive on the sides and the back. Some microphones utilize that polar pattern for different application, which we'll get into later, but that's pretty much what supercardioid means. And then we got the omnidirectional polar pattern. Omnidirectional means that basically it captures sound from every direction. It has a 360 degrees sound reproduction. So for some applications that can be really useful, for example for room reproduction or for lavaliers, which I am currently talking into, those polar patterns can be really great. I want to get into different sizes of microphone. If you're new to the microphone world, you might notice that there's some big ones, there's some small ones, and I want to roughly explain to you how that can affect the sound. So let's start with the smaller ones. Smaller diaphragms will tend to do a better job at catching high frequencies, and they'll tend to have a bit of a more transparent sound, which means that the sound will stay true to the source. They work well for some application, for example, on very detailed instruments that are already naturally very ear-pleasing, like a violin, an acoustic piano, that kind of stuff. They really excel at it, and that's more the size that you want to go for these kind of applications. And then we have larger microphones that will have a larger capsule, a larger diaphragm. They tend to do a better job at reproducing lower frequencies, so they're excellent for some kind of applications like an electric bass guitar amp or a kick drum. They'll do a great job at that. They also sometimes tend to add a bit of coloration to their sound, so they'll be good to enhance certain sources, like for example the human voice. People will tend to like a bit of a larger diaphragm to capturing vocals because they can make things sound even better sometimes than the actual source. So some of those instruments will sound maybe harsher or a bit more bland in a smaller diaphragm. So sometimes for those kind of application, it's better to go larger. Alright, so since there are a lot of microphones to talk about, we'll separate the video in two segments. The first one focusing on vocal microphones, and then we will move on to instrument microphones. Alright, so now let's actually take a look into microphone types. The first one I want to talk about is the vocal handheld microphone. You've probably seen this one a lot. It's a very common microphone. They're super useful in live situation. They'll usually have a dynamic capsule, not requiring any power to get sound out of them, and also a cardioid polar pattern, or sometimes even super cardioid, allowing it to avoid any bleed into the microphone or feedback and other problems that you might experience in live situations. They tend to also not be super sensitive, so they allow you to make sure to actually capture the sound that you want to capture and not anything else. So there are some pros and some cons with them. The first pro is that they fit in a typical mic clip just like this. So these are super easy to find. They're inexpensive. You can find them at a lot of music stores like RedOne right here. And it won't be a big deal if you lose them or anything like that. Another pro is that they tend to be super sturdy, so you know, when you pass them around to people, they drop it, they're not careful with it, your microphone's not necessarily gonna break, especially this one right here. So as you'll find throughout this video is that not every microphone is perfect. There's definitely some disadvantages of this kind of microphone. Firstly, it's not necessarily the greatest or clearest sound quality. Although some can be great, you might find a better sound quality in some condenser microphones that are not necessarily appropriate for live in some cases because they tend to be more sensitive, capture more background noises and such. Another con is that you need to physically hold it or have it on a microphone stand in order to get close to your source and appropriately capture the sound. And also, yes, like I just mentioned, you need to be close to your source for it to work properly. So it may be a pro in some cases that you really just want the source sound right in front of it to be captured, but sometimes it can be a con when you want to capture sound from further away or things like that. You're not going to be able to do that appropriately with this kind of microphone. Alright, so now let's get into your typical studio recording condenser microphone. They'll look a little bit like this most of the times. So these will have a condenser capsule, making them very accurate, although requiring phantom power in order to get sound. Most of them will be cardioid. You will find some models that will be multi-pattern, meaning that you can switch from various polar patterns. Typically you want to use them for vocals, but you can also use them for a lot of different things. They're very versatile. You can use them as a room microphone, you can sometimes use them as overheads, and a lot of different uses. The advantages of them is that they have a very wide frequency response. They can catch a lot of different frequencies, making them very versatile. Having a great sound to them, excellent at high frequencies. They tend to have also low noise, meaning that you're not going to get much noise out of the microphone itself, making them ideal for recording. But there are also some disadvantages with those kind of microphones. So their condenser capsules tend to be more fragile, so you want to be a bit more careful with this kind of microphone. You do not want to drop this kind of microphone at all. They are also, like I said, sensitive, which can be great in some cases, but sometimes can be a disadvantage in the sense that you can get distortion very easily out of them with loud sources and things like that. So yeah, you definitely want to be careful at your gain level on them depending on what you are trying to record. Another disadvantage is that most of them will have a very specific mount or clip to them, like this microphone right here. So if you happen to lose your mount or clip, it can be sometimes a bit harder and more expensive to replace. Alright, so now let's talk about vocal broadcast microphones. I have an example right here to show you. These microphones will typically have a dynamic capsule and a cardioid or supercardioid polar pattern. So there's advantages to them. The main advantage is due to their dynamic capsule. They're less sensitive than condenser capsules, so they're great to avoid background noises coming in, to avoid the sound of other people talking right beside you coming in. So the ideal situation for them will be, podcasts, radio shows, live streams, things like that you want to have a proper reproduction of the human voice without having to capture everything else around it. They have usually a large diaphragm and are usually very colored, so they add a lot of enhancements to your voice, giving you instantly that radio kind of voice that a lot of people are seeking for. So if you're doing these kind of application, this is the microphone you want to grab. There are some disadvantages. They tend to be fairly heavy. They tend to also cost more money than your typical handheld microphone, for example. They'll be a bit more fragile than your handheld microphone. They have they're made more sophistically, and also will require most of the times a specific mic clip. So you do want to be careful with your mic clip with that one. They're a bit unique to every model, so you definitely not want to lose that one as well. Alright, so now let's look into lavalier microphones. They look like this. They have a very small form factor. They'll typically either have a condenser capsule or a dynamic capsule. It really depends on the model. And their polar pattern will most of the time be omnidirectional. Although some will be cardioid, the cardioid ones will take a bit more time to set up. You'll have to make sure that the microphone is capturing the source appropriately, so it might be a bit harder to set up. So you primarily use will be for hands-free speech, so comedians, people that want to talk without necessarily having to hold something or have a stand right in front of them. It will be very useful for that. It'll be useful for also video making, films, things like that. Another big advantage is that they're very easy to hide. So for those applications, it's great because you won't necessarily see the microphone easily. They also, most of them will have a very wireless integration. They'll be made to work wirelessly with various wireless systems, body packs and receivers, etc. Their disadvantages are that they won't necessarily have as good of a sound quality as a handheld microphone for the same price. You might need to invest a bit more to get really great sound out of them. And also there is that possibility of them falling or moving around while you record your sound that might affect the sound during the performance or recording. They might also not work on every kind of clothing. So for example, some dresses, you might not be able to position it properly. So now let's get into headsets. There's a lot of different kinds of headsets, so I'll do my best to guide you through them. So first you have dynamic cardioid headset. They'll look something like this, have quite a bigger capsule than, let's say, a lavalier. The speaker will have to be right in front of the capsule for it to properly capture the sound. But you do also have other kind of headsets that can be a bit more discreet, like this, with a tiny capsule, similar to a lavalier. Those usually will have a condenser capsule, allowing them to be a bit more sensitive and not requiring the speaker to be necessarily right in front of the microphone in order to capture it. It'll have also an omnidirectional polar pattern. So there's some advantage and disadvantage to headset. One of the advantages is that typically you'll get a better sound quality than lavaliers at the same price. Another advantage is that you'll be able to freely move around when you wear them. They're not gonna slip or anything like that. You also don't have to worry about the clothing you're wearing. They're not dependent on that at all. A lot of them will also have easy wireless integration. So most of the models will be made to go along with some wireless kits. So that's great if you want to avoid long running cables. Some disadvantage is that you're not going to be able to completely hide it like a lavalier. So for videos and filmmaking, that might not be a good option for you. But in other cases, they can be really great. Discrete one like this though tend to be more expensive. So that's also another thing to consider when you're picking out your headsets. So now let's talk about instruments microphone. There are a lot of different kinds for various usage. I'll do my best to walk you through them. I want to start with the small diaphragm instrument microphones. They have a lot of different form factors. This is just one of them. They'll have a dynamic capsule and a cardioid polar pattern, although sometimes super cardioid, like for instance, this one right here. So these kind of microphones will be great on a wide variety of instruments, like electric guitar cabinets, snare drum, toms, especially things that are loud. Their dynamic capsule will be able to take a lot of sound without distorting or clipping or anything like that. So anything that's very loud, most of the time you'll want to go with these kind of microphones. So that's pretty much the advantages of them. There are some disadvantages. They don't have the clearest sound possible. So for some more articulate instruments like violins, acoustic guitar, acoustic pianos, those more kind of delicate sounds, you might not want to use them because they won't properly reproduce the sound. You really want to use those for louder sources most of the time. So now let's talk about larger diaphragms, instrument microphones. Their form factor will be something a little bit like this. They'll be way bigger than your smaller diaphragm instrument microphone, and these will have a dynamic capsule, also allowing them to handle a lot of sound. They'll have a cardioid or supercardioid polar pattern as well. You want to use them typically for lower frequencies, so every instrument that has a lower register, these will do a great job at capturing those low frequencies effectively. So everything that's like a kick drum, a trombone, a bass guitar, an electric bass guitar, things like that, these will excel for that use. They also usually will have a mic clip integrated with them or will work on a typical regular mic clip. So that's also a great advantage. Disadvantage is that they're a bit limited in their use. You know, for anything else that's not low frequencies, they might not do a great job at capturing the whole frequency spectrum. So you definitely want to use them for that and not necessarily other things. Alright, so next up we got small diaphragms condenser microphones, or pencil microphones as a lot of people like to call them. You can recognize them easily because they look often like this. They look literally just like a pencil. They'll have a condenser capsule and also a cardioid polar pattern. So what is great with them is that they have they do a very great job at catching high frequencies. They have a lot of air to their sound, a lot of shine. So they work great on certain instruments like cymbals, for example. You definitely want to use that for your cymbal, hi-hats, crash rides, things like that. They will do a great job at capturing that sound, those sounds. They will also work great on articulate instruments like pianos, violins, things like that. Their condenser capsule allow them to be pretty sensitive, so you can capture sound from far away. You don't have to be super close to the source. So they're great as drum overheads. They're great at also capturing choirs and various things from further away. The cons with them is that typically they'll have a specific mic clip for them. So that's also something you don't want to lose. Like I said, they're very good at higher frequencies, but for other instruments that are not as high in the frequency spectrum, they might not do as good of a job at capturing that. And they also can be a bit pricey depending on the models. So lastly, I'm going to talk about clip-on microphones. I'll show you an example right here. These microphones will tend to have a smaller capsule. The capsule will be condenser or dynamic depending on what the microphone is designed for, with also a cardioid polar pattern. So the dynamic clip-on microphones will be made usually more for percussions, for example, a drum or a djembe, things like that they will excel for, but you will also find some condenser ones, also a small capsule that will be better for articulate instruments like acoustic guitar, violins, saxophones, acoustic pianos, and things like that. So one advantage of them is that they ensure you the best quality possible for the instrument you are trying to mic. They are also stand-free. They eliminate you the need of a stand, with also easy wireless integration. They can work with various wireless systems. So for performers that want to be able to move around freely and get still a great sound out of their instrument, it's really great for that. One disadvantage is that they will be made for specific instruments, so the clip they come with might not work for, if it's made for a violin, it might not work for an acoustic piano or for an acoustic guitar and vice versa. So when you're picking them out, you gotta be conscious that it might work for only one kind of instrument. They also tend to be fragile, so you want to be very careful with them, especially the condenser ones. And they tend to also be expensive because they're very meticulously made for one specific kind of instrument. Alright guys, well thank you so much for tuning in into today's episode. I hope we were helpful in helping you finding the right microphone for your needs. Please leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Leave a comment if you want to share some thoughts, have any questions, we'll be happy to answer. Feel free to come see us at Music RedOne or call us if you got any questions and want to have further information on these microphones or other products. Our professional will be happy to help you, and we'll see you in the next video.